Festina is a Swiss brand best known for producing wristwatches. You may have seen their recent advertisements featuring their ambassador, Hollywood actor Gerard Butler.
This is
Festina.
Despite this recent shift towards lifestyle marketing, for years Festina sponsored sporting events, including the famous Tour de France bicycle race. In fact, for over a decade they had their own professional cycling team, racing under the Festina banner. Coming into the 1998 season, Festina had a star-studded lineup and were considered by many to be the #1 cycling team on the planet. However, a shocking event would seal the fate of this once popular squad. Days before the start of the 1998 Tour de France event, officials discovered a large haul of over 400 doping products in one of the Festina support cars, including performance-enhancing drugs such as steroids. Camera teams were present to beam the embarrassing footage of their banning around the world. Major investigations followed, which ultimately resulted in multiple teams withdrawing from the race and a string of arrests being made too. By December 2000, all of the Festina riders had admitted to using these drugs during the contest, and jail sentences were handed out to several Festina staff members. While doping was suspected to be in widespread usage at this point, the incident nonetheless destroyed the reputation of the Festina team and led to their demise less than 12 months later. Despite the tarnishing of their brand name, Festina has continued to produce wristwatches to this day. You may think there's no such thing as bad publicity, and funnily enough it's from a documentary about this incident that I first heard about the brand. When doing my research, I found very little information about Festina and its production processes. If WatchWiki is to be believed, this brand now produces their watches in 3 different countries: Spain, Switzerland and Japan. The latter operation being reportedly handled by Citizen, which is no surprise given that this brand is known to use their Miyota movements. Whatever the case, I found there were no reviews at all on YouTube, so I decided to grab one of these and see what they were like in case you were considering them. I took a look online and got Amazon to send me this retro looking dress model, which I thought looked pretty attractive on the stock images. I'll link it below if you want to take a look at it for yourself. A day or two later and it arrived. Let's see how these watches stack up. The piece arrived in this flat faux leather box, emblazoned with the Festina logo atop. The watch was just lying down within, so some extra protection would have been appreciated to prevent any damage. Nevertheless, it still arrived in one piece, and upon first impressions, I really like the aesthetic. It has a truly vintage vibe and almost reminds me of some of the Orient Bambino models, but smaller. Indeed, this has classic sizing, with a diameter at a shade under 36mm and a slim 9.6mm thickness, which includes the domed crystal. The comparatively standard 44mm lug-to-lug size makes this feel more like a 38mm watch, but either way, this is still definitely for those after a mid-century look. On wrist, it does an excellent job of imitating a traditional vintage watch, though it comes with more modern construction. You have a stainless steel case combined with a stainless steel bracelet, the former appearing in a fully polished finish. This suits the dressier look of the piece, and it looks quite slick and refined as it catches the light on wrist. As you might expect for a dress watch with a snapback case, you're only going to get a limited 3-bar water resistance here, which isn't enough to tackle any sort of prolonged water exposure. While this company certainly has a history involved with sports, I wouldn't take this one to any sort of water sport activity. By default, this watch comes on either a leather strap or a steel band, and as you can see, I opted for the latter. This is an expandable one, which comes with its upsides and downsides. Due to the nature of these, they have the potential to easily trap and grab hairs, especially when putting on the watch. Nevertheless, they're possibly the fastest to use when adjusted correctly and can be extremely comfortable once on wrist. This Festina also came with a rather unusual link and clasp system that I haven't seen before. Not only does this feature removable links on each end, but the clasp also houses a total of 9 micro adjustment holes to ensure a perfect fit. It also has these little windows on the rear, so you might be able to get in here with some sort of spring bar tool to adjust them. While this is very useful, despite being a tad tricky to process at first, it does have one downside. If your wrists are any smaller than mine, this isn't going to fit. Mine is 6¼ inches, and I had to remove all of the additional links and push each end to the very central micro adjustment holes to make this band as short as possible, at which point it just about fits nicely. For those with larger sized wrists, you can have no issues finding the perfect fit, but if you have tiny wrists, this is simply going to be too big, so you might have to go for the leather option. Despite this, it still looks pretty cool, and the clasp even has a design that blends in very nicely with the rest of it. My main gripe with the build quality is the overall weight. True, this watch does use a quartz movement, which is never going to add a ton of heft. However, considering it's all stainless steel, it doesn't feel quite as premium as you might want it to. This does have the side benefit of making the watch nice and light and comfortable, but I thought it was worth a mention as the bracelet in particular feels quite tinny almost and plasticky. The look of this watch is what will either make or break it for you though. From a side-on perspective, that heavily domed crystal stands proudly above the dial. In an attempt to fully embrace the retro aesthetic, this is acrylic crystal, which provides no noticeable distortion until you reach particularly steep angles. This looks awesome, but it won't be scratch resistant, despite the fact that you can polish it at a later date if that did happen. Considering it was retailing for about £70, that isn't so bad, and at least the excuse that it's for aesthetics actually holds some weight with this piece given the design. Whereas in other cases we've heard people use this excuse when the watch was nothing like a vintage watch. That's also complemented by the similarly curved dial, which has an off-white colour, reminiscent of a pearlescent ivory tone almost. The sunburst effect looks brilliant for such a budget watch. It makes the watch look much more premium, especially at a passing glance. It features gold-coloured faceted indices at each hour, as well as a gold F logo below the 12 o'clock position, indicating that this is indeed a Festina. To fit the minimalist look, this watch has no minute track and instead has a clean second subdial positioned just below the central stem. This reduces the visual clutter and limits the possibility of the second hand missing the markers, which is a common occurrence with these lower end quartz movements. As previously mentioned, this is a Japanese Miyota. In terms of accuracy, you'll still get excellent performance compared to similarly priced automatic watches, though perhaps you don't get the same raw bang for the buck compared to some of those. In terms of finishing though, for the most part, I think it competes with some of the big boys in this price range. Alignment of all the applied areas is on point, and other sections such as the printing and polishing are fairly decent too. Overall, I've been quite impressed by this model, which they're labelling as part of their extra range as is visible on the dial. Since I placed my order, this has now gone down to closer to £60, which I think is good value for this style of watch that looks this good. I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. You get that retro vintage look without any of the downsides that you might encounter with the vintage market, such as a lack of water resistance or the watch breaking. Despite this, there's no way I'd pay the £139 price tag that came with the watch. When you get to that price point, there's just too much competition out there to justify buying a basic quartz watch. For instance, for around £100, there's the similarly styled Bambino range, which offers a mechanical movement too. I reviewed one of those in this video if you want to watch it next. If you enjoyed this one, consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.